2, and 1. The greatest trick the devil ever put was convincing everyone he didn't exist. These corporations have historically abused our environment to use it for profit, for selfish gain, for their own bottom line. And now side government wants to be subsumed by these corporations, catering to their needs first, while patting themselves on the back in saying we are doing the right thing for the environment. Mr. Speaker, I will prove to you why the government side perfectly encapsulates the one step forward, two steps back type of mentality. At best, what you get from government is a wash. At worst, it ends up being a net negative for everyone else on the planet. What do I mean by this? At opposition's very best, or government's very best, sure, they might buy land for trees to grow, or they might have new e-vehicles in order to transport other people, but the large impact and harm of corporations taking a majority of our natural resources, implementing downright corrupt and predatory procedures will still continue to exist. Essentially, it's a smokescreen. We brought this land which justifies us polluting a random river in South America. At worst, what happens as a result is that these corporations now have a vested interest to largely promote their new green initiatives and how they're becoming net negative, while in the backside, still continuing to do all of the stuff we associate with them doing. So, Mr. Speaker, if you want true tangible results and real tangible change, why do we need this extra layer of gymnastics? In fact, I would posit that this very policy does what the government wants to lessen. Because in the process of creating these new green tech initiatives, it enables a market of neo-industrialization to grow and propagate. More on that in my extension. I'll do 3 things in DLO, rebuttals, extension, and then some weighing. Firstly, on rebuttals. Number 1, they said, or DPM said that, oh, they'll just pay a fine and then they'll go away. Which is a valid kind of point, but it is precisely because my LO told you that we want status quo on steroids. If we want to actually put a dent on these companies to disincentivize them from abusing the environment, then we tax them a higher amount, to the point in which it does affect them. The previous speaker says that rich companies will just spam the cash they have and pay all the fines. Again, we'll keep increasing it to the point that it will hurt their margins and profitability. Number 3, even if green technology in the long run becomes cheaper, which is the best case on their side, these happen slower because only the rich corporations will be able to invest in these particular things. But majority of the smaller to medium-sized enterprises who eventually become large contributors won't be able to afford these technologies. But even if they could, it's merely a distraction away from their business model. Forcing their fleets to have a shift to e-vehicles or forcing them to build storage technology for carbon capture. A lot of these are industry-specific. However, the negative reinforcement we tell you through direct taxation is better than all of the because all of the corporations will feel the effect of these fines and of these taxes. Number 4, on their side, if you force them to have to switch to green technology in order to get their corporate carbon offsets, they are likely to pass on the cost to the consumer. And that makes it harder for the consumers to afford their goods and services. This leads to rising prices in food, shampoo, other fast-moving consumer goods in developing nations, which unfortunately also harms their margin and bottom line. This becomes literally a disincentive structure and a lose-lose situation for everybody involved. Finally, on the idea of carbon credits, it's actually those rich nations that can use their money to actually buy more credits and monopolize their ability to justify more environmental damage. Why is that? This is because the cost of investing in green tech for corporate carbon offsets has to make these expenses back, right, for their shareholders. These investments need to have a return, and these costs have to be made back. Hence, they likely have to increase prices, which harm the end consumers. Before I get into my extension, sure, BY.
So you're saying that somehow, even if you impose a 20% tax on shale, that they can be sustainably worked out of their oil-producing industry. And if they cannot, you're willing to accept the economic damage that one of the largest oil chain is going to close down, right?
Yeah, at a certain point, because we're talking about the environment and you want the environment to not die in like 100 years, right? So yes, we would be willing to go to that type of drastic measure which actually helps the environment in the long term, something that you guys aren't going to do. So, what is my extension? Well, carbon offsets is just another form of neo-industrialization which will further harm the environment in the long term. So what does neo-industrialization look like? Well, assumingly, every single initiative that these companies and corporations will do require a bunch of resources in order to create. So like the amount it takes to create any electric vehicle is absurd. You need all the components of creating it in the first place, which entails you having to spend variable resources, in like time in shipping all of these parts into one place, ensuring some form of quality control without taking into consideration that you actually have to make it, which also contributes largely to carbon emissions. So what essentially happens when you prop up these new initiatives is that you by necessity prop up 5 to 6 more layers of preparation that end up also contributing to more and more carbon emissions. So the worst part about this is that it is a form of neo-industrialization, as in corporations have the ambivalence and fiat to say, hey, we're just doing our part, you can't really critique us because, we had this like tree building or something. Even if, for example, none of that is true, at the end of the day, the effect that it has is just extremely marginal. Why is that so? Because corporations have the incentive of minimizing their costs and maximizing their profits, i.e. they're far more likely to spend a bit in order to genuflect to the environmentalist while spending everything else to create more products. As the PM said, it's going to help these businesses. It's not even the case of them being malevolent, it's just the case of them being strategic. So what are the widespread impacts of this? Number one, it still propagates unhealthy consumption of these corporations, which I already mentioned. But more importantly, number two, it's anti-poor. Because companies like Shell, Exxon, P&G, Nike, Apple, Tesla, ironically, all have their bases in America, while outsourcing their businesses elsewhere. That means that this policy, sure, they're far more likely to create initiatives in their own developed countries because that's the base of their operations, but as a result of that, their continued subjugation and abuse of poor nations, who they take resources out of to propagate their own business, who they use to assumedly make these e-vehicles or whatever initiative they want, will still stand. So hey, maybe it will be sustainable for the US at the expense of Africa, South America, major parts of Asia. Status quo will become worse. So why is direct reduction in carbon emissions a far better alternative? Because direct reduction, while sure we are willing to take that maybe businesses will become less, we ensure the environment is going to be more protected when we actually put the perpetrators on the stand. So what happens inside government? What happens is that these businesses are going to continue to produce carbon emissions. That this reduction at best does but a dent and a wash to the problem of carbon emissions. If it is only on-side opposition where you hold these malevolent actors accountable, which is precisely why we oppose. Thank you.